The day Maren Alcott rode into Caldwell Flats with $4 and a broken saddle cinch, she had already buried her pride somewhere along the 30 miles of hardpan behind her. She was not the kind of woman who asked for things. She had learned early that asking opened a door, and what came through was rarely mercy. But she was also not the kind of woman who lay down in the dust and waited for the buzzards, and so she rode into that town the way she had always moved through hard places, head up, jaw set, pale green eyes forward, even if the horse under her was limping and the sun was doing its worst. Caldwell Flats was the kind of town that sized you up the moment you cleared the livery. 3 saloons, a rail depot with a busted sign, a general store with a proprietor who watched the street like a magistrate watching a dock. Maren felt the eyes before she saw the faces, the rocking chairs going still, the conversations dropping half a register, the particular silence that settled on a place when someone new and obviously broke arrived in it. She tied her mare at the post outside Dunbar's store and went in. The man behind the counter had slick dark brown hair and cold pale blue eyes that assessed her the way a gambler assessed a hand, quick, complete, and dismissive. His name was Harlan Crue, though she did not know that yet. He smiled when she came in, and it was the kind of smile that started at the mouth and stopped before it got anywhere near the eyes. She asked about work. She asked quietly and plainly, the way her mother had taught her, and Crue listened with his hands flat on the counter and his head tilted to one side, like he was considering something charitable. Then he told her the only work in Caldwell Flats worth having was already spoken for, and that a woman who arrived on a limping horse with trail dust on her face was not the kind of help a man in his position was in a position to take on. He said it pleasantly. That was the part she would remember. He said it like he was doing her a favor. She went back out into the heat. She was standing at her mare's head, running her hand along the horse's neck, telling herself to think, to keep thinking because that was the only thing she had left, when the 3 riders came off the side street. She heard the boots on the boardwalk before she saw them. 2 men flanking a third, wider one, and the widest one had a face like a split knuckle, and the slow walk of a person who had never once been told no. His name, she would learn later, was Dolt Pruitt, and he ran cattle for Crue on the eastern pasture, and had done so long enough to feel entitled to most of what was in that town. He came to a stop in the street directly behind her horse. "That mare yours?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Doesn't look like much." She said nothing to that. "I'm asking what you're doing standing in front of Harlan's store looking like you lost something," Pruitt said. One of the men with him laughed. The other just watched. She turned to face them. She was sturdy and capable in the way that years of physical work made a woman, and her warm brown hair with its thread of copper had come loose from its pins somewhere on the road and hung against the back of her neck in the heat. Her face had the freckles that sun and wind put on a person over time, and she held herself the way she had learned to hold herself when there was nowhere to go. Still, because stillness was the only armor she had. "I'm looking for work," she said. "I'll be on my way." "Now hold on," Pruitt said. He stepped closer. The 2 men with him spread, not wide, just enough. The kind of positioning that was practiced even when the men doing it did not know they were practicing. Maren felt the post at her back before she reached it. She was already stepping backward, already understanding that the street had contracted around her to a size that did not include escape. "You got no work, no place, and a horse that's throwing a shoe," Pruitt said. He was close enough now that she could smell tobacco and old leather and something sour underneath. "Seems to me you're in a poor position to be walking away from a conversation." Her back met the post. Her hand was at her side. She had nothing in it. She had sold the pistol 2 weeks ago for meal money and had not yet forgiven herself. The widest of the 3 reached out and took hold of the reins above her hand, not grabbing her, not yet, but the message was in the motion, the casual certainty that what was hers could become his without much ceremony. That was when the dust moved, not the wind. The dust at the far end of the street, the fine suspended kind that hangs between buildings in the late afternoon, shifted the way it shifts when something moves through it. A figure came out of the gap between the livery and the feed barn, unhurried, moving with the lean economy of a man who had learned not to waste motion. He was not tall in the way that made people look up. He was tall in the way that made people move. Near black hair, pale grey eyes that read the scene the way a surveyor reads land, methodically, without sentiment. There was a scar along the left jaw that had set at a slight angle, the kind a blade left when it had been a near thing. He wore a trail duster that had seen better decades, and his hands were at his sides, easy, which meant he was not reaching for anything, which meant he had already decided he did not need to. He stopped 3 feet from Pruitt's shoulder. "That's not yours," he said. His voice was the kind that did not carry, but reached everywhere anyway. Pruitt turned. He was not a small man, and he did not turn quickly, but something in how he turned told Maren that he recognized the stranger, or recognized the type, and neither option was comfortable for him. "Briggs," Pruitt said. "Let go of the reins," Briggs said. There was a pause. Not a long one. The kind that exists so that a man like Pruitt can decide whether his pride costs more than his judgment, and then discover, as most men like him eventually do, that it does not. Pruitt let go of the reins. "We were just talking," he said. "You were done," Briggs said. The 2 flanking men looked at each other, looked at Briggs, looked at the ground. There are men in the world whose stillness is more threatening than another man's shouting, and Briggs was one of them, and the 2 flanking men had apparently worked this out. They left, Pruitt last, and slow, the way slow exits are used when a man has nothing else. Maren stood at the post with her hand back on her mare's neck, and her heart going at a pace that had nothing to do with calm. She looked at the man who had walked out of the dust. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her the way a person looks when they are measuring something without scales. Pale grey eyes, nothing performed in them, nothing absent either. "Where are you headed?" he said. She thought about lying. She had been headed toward a plan that was mostly hope and not much architecture, and she was tired enough that the lie would not have held together under scrutiny. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded once, as though this was a reasonable answer. "My spread's 4 miles north. I need someone who can cook and manage a house. I've got a room that's not being used." He paused. "Pays fair. Works honest." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because someone did the same for me once, a long time ago." He said it the way people say things they have decided are simply true and require no ornamentation. And because Pruitt doesn't let go of things easy, you'd be safer off his ground. She thought about her $4. She thought about the horse with the loose shoe and the cinch that would not hold past another hard day's ride. She thought about the 30 miles of hardpan behind her, and the nothing that was in every direction she had pointed herself since March. "All right," she said. He turned and walked back toward the livery, and she untied her mare and followed him, because in the arithmetic of her situation there was nothing else that added up. His name was Briggs Calloway, and his spread sat at the foot of a long ridge that broke the wind before it reached the buildings. The house was not large. It was clean. There was a cook stove that drew well, and a window in the kitchen that faced east, and Maren stood in that kitchen the first evening, and felt something she had not felt since before her husband died, and left her with the debts and the silence. She felt like the walls knew she was there. She cooked what was in the larder, beans and salt pork and cornbread that she made from memory, the kind of bread her mother had made on winter mornings when the flour was low, but the house was warm. Briggs came in from the barn when the light was going orange, and sat at the table and ate without comment, and she understood this was not indifference, but appreciation of a kind that had nothing performative in it. After, she washed the dishes, and he came to stand in the doorway, not crowding the kitchen, just standing where the light from the lamp reached him and made the scar on his jaw read like something the country had written on him. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "I'll earn it," she said. "I know you will," he said. And then, "There's a woman in town, Eleanor Marsh, who lost her husband to a mine collapse 3 years back. She manages the post office now. If you're looking for someone who knows this county, she's worth knowing." He said it the way he said most things, plainly, and then he stopped talking. She worked. That was the truth of the weeks that followed, the plain fact underneath the rest of it. She worked, and the work was what returned to her what the road had taken. She was up before light, and the barn chores were done by the time Briggs came out, and she cooked 3 meals a day with whatever came available, and mended the house linens, and fixed the broken step on the porch, and rebuilt the kitchen garden that had gone fallow from neglect. She found that she liked the physical repetition of it, the way it required the body to commit fully, and left the mind room to breathe. Briggs watched without commenting on it. She caught him watching sometimes, not in the way that made her careful, but in the way that a man watches something he is trying to understand. Once, coming back from the south pasture, he told her, without preamble, the way he told most things, that he had bought this land 10 years ago with 2 horses and $140 that he had saved working the cattle drives out of Texas, and that he had not intended to stay. He said it with a kind of wondering tone, like he was still not sure how it had happened. She understood that. The trouble came back on a Thursday, the way trouble in small towns has a habit of timing itself for the middle of the working week when people are tired. Maren was at Dunbar's store, not Crue's counter this time, but the back room, where Eleanor Marsh had helped her arrange a small credit on Briggs's account for household supplies. When Pruitt came through the front door with one of his men and found her at the back, he looked at her, the way a man looks at a thing he thought he had settled, and then found unsettled. "Calloway's got himself a housekeeper," he said. He said it to no one in particular, which was how he made sure everyone heard it. Eleanor was at Maren's elbow, and Maren felt the older woman go still, with the particular stillness of a person who has lived in a small town long enough to know when something is beginning that will get worse before it stops. Pruitt came down the center aisle. He was not moving fast. He did not need to move fast. There was no one in this room who was going to stop him except the woman standing at the back of it, and they both knew what she had in that situation and what she did not. "You told Harlan you were passing through," Pruitt said. "Seems you're not passing through." "I found work," she said. "Calloway's place isn't much of a refuge," Pruitt said. He was close again. The same distance as the first time, the same territorial physics of a man who did not understand that proximity was not argument. "That land butts up against Harlan's eastern lease. You know what Harlan wants with that land?" "I don't," she said. "He wants Calloway off it," Pruitt said, "and he wants off it in a way that sticks. So the woman Calloway's hired to run his house, she's an interest of Harlan's by association. You understand that?" She understood it. She had been afraid before, and she was afraid now, but the fear had a shape this time, and a location, and she found that a named, located fear was more manageable than the formless kind she had been carrying since March. "I understand," she said, "and I'll tell you what you can tell Harlan Crue. That land is Briggs Calloway's land, filed and recorded, and I am employed on it lawfully. And if Harlan Crue wants to make that his business, he's welcome to make it Briggs Calloway's business as well." Pruitt looked at her. He was quiet for a moment that stretched. Then he said, "We'll see," and walked out. Eleanor let out a breath beside her that had been held a long time. "You're either very brave or very tired," Eleanor said. "Both," Maren said. She told Briggs that evening. She told him plainly, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp between them, and she watched him listen. The pale grey eyes steady, the jaw set at the angle of a man receiving information. He is filing in the same place. He files all other facts that will eventually require action. He was quiet when she finished. Then he said, "Crue's been after that east pasture for 2 years. He ran the Jarrett family off it by making their credit disappear and their well water go bad." He said it without heat, the way you state facts that make you furious if you let them. "He's not going to come at me the same way." "No," she said, "he's going to come at me." Briggs looked at her. Something shifted in his face. Not worry exactly, but the acknowledgement of a thing he had not fully considered, and now had to. "Then he won't find purchase," Briggs said. "Stay close to the spread. If you go to town, take the wagon so you're visible. I'll have a word with the sheriff." "Is the sheriff useful?" she said. A pause. "For some things." He got up and went to the window and looked out at the dark that had settled over the pasture, and she watched his profile against the glass. The clean, hard line of it, the scar that caught the lamp's edge. She thought about a man who had done this for 10 years alone, who had built something from 2 horses and $140 and had not intended to stay. "Briggs," she said. He looked at her. She did not know what she had meant to say. She looked at him a moment and then said, "Thank you for the offer you made in town, for the work, for this." He held her gaze. It was not a long look, but it was a full one. "You'd have found a way," he said. "You're not a woman who doesn't find a way." It came on a Saturday. Crue came with 3 men and a paper that his lawyer in Hayes City had drawn up, and he came at midday because midday was public, and witnesses were useful when you wanted a thing to look legal. He stopped his buggy in the yard and called out in the carrying voice of a man who had practiced carrying his voice, and Maren came to the porch. She was alone. Briggs was at the south fence line, a 1/4 mile out, though she did not say this. Crue descended from the buggy with his slick dark hair and his politician's smile, and the paper held in a way that was meant to appear official. He told her he had a purchase offer for the east pasture, signed and notarized, and that Calloway had 48 hours to respond, or the matter would go to the Land Commission in Hayes City on the grounds of a disputed boundary survey. "There's no disputed survey," she said. "The document says otherwise," Crue said pleasantly. "Then the document's a lie," she said. Crue looked at her the way he had looked at her the first day, that rapid dismissal, that measuring, and she felt the scar of it the same way, not as shame, not any more, but as information about who he was. "You're in an interesting position," he said, "working for a man who's about to have a great deal of legal difficulty." "I work for a man who owns his land free and clear," she said, "and I'm looking at a man who's standing on that land without an invitation. I'd ask you to leave." Crue's smile did not falter, which told her that he had done this before with other women in other doorways, and had always found a way through. The sound of hoofbeats came from the south. Briggs came into the yard at a canter and pulled up beside the buggy, and the look he gave Crue was the same look he had given Pruitt in the street, methodical, unsentimental, a surveyor reading land. He dismounted. He took the paper from Crue's extended hand and read it. He read the whole of it, slowly, and then he folded it along its own creases and held it out. "That boundary line was recorded in 1881, Briggs said. "The survey's in the county clerk's office in Hayes City. You know that because you already paid someone to look at it. Whatever this paper says, the clerk's record says something different." He held it until Crue took it back. "Your lawyer will know this. If he drew this document, he knows it already. That's his problem." Crue looked at him for a moment. The smile was still there, but it had become the kind of smile that is used to cover retreat. "We'll see what the commission thinks," Crue said. "We will," Briggs said. "Take your men off my land." They went. Maren stood on the porch and watched the buggy roll back down the track to the main road, and when it was gone, she let out the breath she had been holding since it arrived. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she hid by folding them in her apron. Briggs came up the porch steps. He looked at her hands. He did not say anything about them. "The commission will fine for the survey," he said. "Crue knows it. This was about rattling you, making you leave." "I know," she said. "Are you going to?" She looked at him, at the pale grey eyes and the scar, and the lean, economical line of a man who had decided a long time ago that retreat was a more expensive option than staying. "No," she said. He was quiet. Then he said, "The east pasture needs a second hand come spring. I can't run it alone." He was looking out past her at the land, at the ridge that broke the wind before it reached the house. "If you're still here—" It was not a question. Not exactly. It was an opening left deliberately, the way a man who has learned not to assume leaves space for another person to decide. "I'll be here," she said. He looked at her then, and this time the look was not the surveyor's look. It was something slower and more uncertain and more honest, the look of a man who has held himself at a careful distance for a long time and is deciding, with some seriousness, whether the distance has served him. "All right," he said. He said it the way he said most things, plainly and without ornamentation, as though it were a fact that had been waiting to become true and had simply finally been allowed to. The Land Commission ruled in Briggs Calloway's favour the following month, and Harlan Crue's paper was found to be based on a survey that his own lawyer eventually admitted had been altered. Crue paid a fine and lost his lease on the eastern pasture and left Caldwell Flats the following spring for somewhere that did not know him yet, which was the only mercy a man like Crue ever managed, the mercy of starting over in a place that had not learned his smile yet. Pruitt stayed, but he stayed smaller. Eleanor Marsh became the first person Maren thought of as a friend in a year that had been mostly strangers and hard roads. They drank coffee on Eleanor's porch on Sunday mornings and talked about the country the way women who have survived it talk, without sentimentality, with a clear-eyed affection for its difficulty, for what it had made of them. The east pasture came in strong that spring, the grass thick from a wet winter, and Maren worked it alongside Briggs, from first light to the last of the long summer evenings. There was a morning in June when they were at the fence line together, and the sun was coming up over the ridge, and the whole length of the land was gold with it, and Briggs said, without looking at her, "I was going to leave this place. 3 separate times I had it decided." "What stopped you?" she said. He was quiet a moment, the fence wire in his gloved hands, the pale grey eyes on the ridge. "I didn't have anywhere better to go," he said, and then, quieter, "And then I did." She looked at him. He was looking at the ridge still, but she understood what he meant, and he knew she understood, and that was enough, more than enough, in the arithmetic of 2 people who had both learned that words were expensive and ought to be spent carefully. The house was warm that winter. That was the thing Maren came back to years later, when she tried to explain what the year had been. Not the fear, not the riders in the street, not Crue and his altered paper, not the 30 miles of hardpan and the $4 and the cinch that would not hold. The house was warm. It had been empty a long time before she arrived, warm only in the technical sense, fire in the stove, but no one to carry the warmth room to room. And then she was there, and Briggs was there, and Eleanor came for supper twice a month, and the east pasture came in, and the step she had mended on the porch held through the winter without complaint, and the kitchen window still faced east, and every morning the light came through it and found them there. That was the thing. The light came through the window and found them there, and that was enough, More than enough. It always had been.